Greetings, my good bitches. The name's Francis, Coke Francis. I'm an editor, Twitch streamer, drag artist, and I'm here because I always knew fascism would eventually take over, but I never thought it would be this unfashionable. I know, I talk all the time about how fascists don't have a single original bone in their body, how their art is reduced to glorifying states and their leaders, etc., etc. But somehow, all of my research never quite dissolved this mental image that I and the collective consciousness had, that the inevitable rise of fascism would look, I don't know, cooler?
This is the dumbest way to live through a global fascist period. Like, I thought it would at least be cooler. I thought there would be more like boots and black leather and scary marches. This is like they want to take your rights away, but they're wearing a female body inspector t-shirt. Like, why does it have to be so aesthetically disappointing and so stupid? Like, could you oppress me without looking like my most alcoholic uncle?
Like, my Jewish ancestors didn't survive World War II just for this next rise of fascism to be this lame and this pathetic. But hey, I wasn't alive back then, so maybe those fascists were way bigger losers than I realized. And unfortunately, my grandparents are no longer here, so I can't ask them if Adolf Hitler also made burner accounts on Twitter just to compliment his Diablo 4 gameplay. I'm sure he would've if the technology was available, though. He definitely strikes me as the kind of guy to do that. Throughout history, fashion is usually influenced by those in power, from celebrities to kings and queens, and everything in between. Recently, Kim Jong-un wore a leather trench coat that was so snazzy that the people of North Korea simply had to go out and buy some for themselves. It was so influential, in fact, that Kim couldn't stand the thought of anybody looking cooler in a leather jacket than him, and swiftly moved to ban leather jackets entirely in North Korea. Except for him, obviously. But a fascist takeover doesn't just influence what you wear, it dictates what you can and can't wear. Benito Mussolini and the Italian Fascist Party is the most notorious example of this. We'll get to that in a minute. Because fascism seeks to eliminate anything that might challenge the status quo or allow for any kind of individuality. Hence, these new insidious laws in the US dictating what it means to present as either a male or a female, and only as a male or a female. So I continued my research and my autistic obsession with fascist fashion to see if it really was as cool as I always thought it was, or as lame as I now realize it might have been. My original plan was to rank every major historical dictator based on their taste in fashion. So I googled a full list and oh boy, I am way too much of a chronic underachiever to tackle something like this. So I decided to narrow my search down to just the 20th century, since it's the most recent and relevant completed one. Like I said in my last video, we are currently living in the 1930s again. So let's see what this turns up. Perfect. Good enough for me. Now, before we move on and fully dissect the fashion choices of every 20th century dictator, it is important that I note something. While every fascist leader is a dictator, not every dictator is a fascist. For the purposes of this video, we'll be defining dictator as it is in the dictionary. A ruler with total power over a country, typically one who has gained control by force. For example, Fidel Castro was not a fascist, but he did gain control of a country by force, and he did have total power over that country. There are a few people on this list who fit that description. And on that note, I also want to make a point of saying that not everybody on this list is equally terrible. Just like yours truly, they're on a spectrum. This video is in no way endorsing any of the people mentioned or not. It's simply diving into whether or not these dictators throughout history would have also been roasted by that savage menswear guy on Twitter, the way so many members of the current US administration have been. I know some of y'all love to take everything I say both literally and seriously, but please remember something, my good bitches. I'm a drag queen on YouTube, the other thing is, I'm not an expert in men's fashion, and tragically, there were no female dictators during the 20th century. So my knowledge admittedly isn't as vast as it was with, say, the MAGA fashion show or the Joy Villa videos. I am not the savage menswear guy on Twitter, but if he's watching this, please know I would love to collab someday and that you can maybe teach me your ways. In the meantime, though, I will do my best. But before we look at this historical drip together, if you are a fan of watching a very tired drag queen talk about nerd shit forever, I ask that you please hold a state-sanctioned fashion show and automatically declare yourself the winner. But when the people don't recognize real fashion when they see it and plot a mass uprising against you, secure your title by going ahead and unzipping your pants and dick slapping those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. We'll be going in chronological order for this list. So first up, we've got Leopold II, Electric Boogaloo, also known as the King of the Belgians. He held the Belgian throne from 1865 all the way to 1909, the longest reign of a Belgian monarch in history, but he's best known for his systematic brutalization and exploitation of the Congo Free State. Leopold II, Pig in the City, made a fortune off of ivory and rubber production through forced labor, torture, and kidnapping. Men, women, and children were subject to amputations when the quotas of rubber were not met. And these atrocities actually led to the original coining of the term crimes against humanity. There aren't a whole lot of pictures of this guy, and you know what? From what I've seen, I'm not terribly impressed. All that ivory and you didn't think to incorporate it into these otherwise garden variety military uniforms? I guess he shook things up a bit with this double-breasted coat here, but like, dude, everyone has one of those. Especially back then. No wonder everyone booed you at your funeral. The wildest part of this is that in 2010, a member of European Parliament actually called him a visionary. In this outfit? Please. This gets a C, I guess. We're not off to a very strong start here. Next up, we've got Enver Pasha. After leading the 1908 Young Turk Revolution as a military officer, he was named de facto commander-in-chief of the Ottoman government. He's also one of the biggest perpetrators of the late Ottoman genocides, and is responsible for the deaths of nearly 2 million Armenians, 750,000 Assyrians, and 500,000 Greeks. He was convicted and sentenced to death for bringing the Ottoman Empire into World War I, but was later rehabilitated by the Turkish president for his contributions to Turkish nationalism. As you can see, regardless of what he's wearing, Pasha looks like Sam Morrill if he went shopping at the Phony Baloney Mustache Emporium. He usually stuck to wearing his military uniform. Of course he did. He had something to prove. But it looks like he's still bothered to sometimes switch it up with traditional Turkish garb or this double-breasted coat. Get ready to see this coat a lot, you guys. I'm telling you, they love him. I'll give some points for variety and the fact that he still looks pretty sharp, but I also can't get over how this coat makes him look like he shrunk inside of it. Fashion sense is decent, definitely not worth getting pardoned over genocide for, so I'll give him a B. Next up, we've got a true OG, Vladimir Lenin. Now, before all the other lefties start jumping down my throat and putting words in my mouth again, remember what we went over in the beginning. We are defining dictator by that specific definition regardless of whether or not you like them. If you don't like it, take it up with Oxford. Lenin founded and led the Bolshevik Revolution, and his government won the Russian Civil War, leading to the world's first socialist state. However, even with the positive steps towards socialism, he still oversaw mass killings and political repression against dissenters. Lenin was described as, quote, exceedingly modest in his personal wants, and, quote, his vanity was minimal, and he allegedly hated the cult of personality that people were trying to build around him. He was a man of the people, and his outfits seemed to represent that. So there's no hypocrisy here with these simple suits and tunics, which is what Russian men traditionally wore at the time. I'm actually a big fan of this style of suit here. Always looks classy in my humble opinion. But this is a Coke Francis video, so if an outfit is mid, we're gonna tell it like it is. The outfits are mid, okay? But they all look fine. This one picture gets points for the cat maybe, but it's the cat we're jazzed on, not the outfit. So I'll give these a C. So really quick before we move on, a lot of you guys gave your opinions on my last video, and plenty of you agreed with me, and some of you didn't. And that is perfectly fine. I explicitly invited you to do so, and I actually do appreciate you voicing your opinions on things and having your own perspective on subjects like that. What did disappoint me though was that nobody noticed the theme of almost every person being pictured with either a cat or a dog. Or, if you did notice, you didn't say anything. Nearly 100,000 views, and it broke my heart a little bit that nobody noticed that running theme. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. Next up, we've got the guy who, I swear to God, if I see one more liberal say Mango Mussolini on Blue Sky, I will burn that app to the ground anyway. The guy that stupid cringy nickname is based off of, Benito Mussolini. As the dictator for the National Fascist Party in Italy, he inspired the spread of fascist movements worldwide at the time, bumping uglies with Hitler and the like during World War II, using secret police to remove any opposition, and outlawing labor strikes. Where have we all seen this happen before, I wonder? Part of this fascist doctrine included, as I briefly mentioned earlier, certain appearances and lifestyles of what they called the New Italian Woman. From a thesis on the subject by Catherine E. North, Mussolini instilled that fascism was more than an ideology, but rather a lifestyle, a kind of civic religion. Given their ability to procreate, women were at the center of this religion. The regime intertwined motherhood with Italianita by sponsoring self-discipline in order to optimize a mind-body commitment to the version of femininity that most benefited the nation. Where have we all seen this happen before, I wonder? He also established Vatican City in 1929 and was finally executed by communist partisans in 1945. There is a solution, guys. Not elaborating further. So my apologies, some of these pictures still have watermarks on them because I needed pictures to best showcase these dictators' fashion senses, and capitalism has decided to ruin the party once again. This Italian stallion definitely seems to have ventured out of the military uniform comfort zone. Here he is giving Oswald Cobblepot. The only thing missing is a monocle and maybe a dead fish. I never thought someone with a perfect square for a head could rock this many hats, but he himself also looks kinda different in every picture, like JD Vance. He's giving Rogan in this one, he's bringing back traditional masculinity in this one. We really got ourselves a guy who can do both. So I gotta give some points for variety, even though these looks didn't totally blow me away, so I'll give these a B. Up next is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a founding father of the Republic of Turkey. Ataturk is another example of someone who is technically a dictator, but not a fascist. After his provisional government won the Turkish War of Independence, Ataturk established several political, economic, and social reforms to benefit the newly formed Turkish Republic, like free primary education and equal rights for women, and resisted the expansionism of fascist nations at the time. And he was known to throw shade at Enver Pasha, aka Sam Morril in a phony baloney mustache. For some reason, Hitler really liked him, but as we know, fascists have no media literacy. This guy definitely knew the Twitter menswear guy in another life. Or maybe the Twitter menswear guy is immortal. The latter is more likely, I think. Ataturk generally stuck to suits, and if there's one thing I have learned from the Twitter menswear guy, it's that suit fits usually come down to shoulder width, collar placement, and the vertical lines. The fact that all of these lines stay vertical even when he sits face down is one way to tell that the fits go hard. It's totally normal for the bottom of your pant leg to ride up a bit when you have your legs crossed like this, but compare this to the way JD Vance's pants ride up a bit too much. It's because they're too slim. Also, he's wearing these socks that are so silly that even Trump called him out for it.
And by the way, I have to speak of inflation. I love these socks. What's with these socks?
It's in honor of the T-shirts.
I'm trying to stay focused, but I'm very impressed with the VP's socks.
Which is especially funny because Trump's suits rarely fit him well, if ever. Anyway, Ataturk's style is simple but also very classy, and he's gonna get our first A of the day. Moving on, we've got Chiang Kai-shek, the leader of the Chinese National Party for 5 rootin' tootin' decades, and the head of state of the Chinese nationalist government. After their defeat to the communists during the Chinese Civil War, the People's Republic of China was established. Kai-shek and his forces then fled to Taiwan, where he imposed martial law and the White Terror, aka mass political repression of Taiwanese citizens. As you can see, Kai-shek kept it pretty simple and sweet when it came to fashion, usually sticking to the all-reliable Zhongshan suit, also known as the Mao suit. It was designed for simplicity and functionality, and became a symbol of political authority in China, hence why we'll be seeing it a lot more later in the video. But you know who always had pretty consistent drip? Kai-shek's wife, Sung Mei-ling. She would wear these gorgeous cheapao dresses, and she also became known for wearing Western fashion, which was very unconventional at the time. Now, when I was doing research for this and writing this script, I had to ask myself something. Do I factor these dictators' spouses' fashion into my grading rubric? And if I did, would I just be contributing to the patriarchy and the fashion industrial complex by crediting these dictators with something they themselves technically did not do? So I decided, for the purposes of making this video more interesting, and since there are several examples of this, yes, I will. So with these two combined, I think that evens out to like a low A. Let's make the $20 million that Mei-ling's family embezzled finally worth it. Next up, you know him? You know him. It's Adolf Hitler. That's his name, right? Do I even need to give an intro for this guy? Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany and eventually the leader of the Nazi Party, using propaganda and populist rhetoric to gain power. He capitalized on protecting free speech and the economic woes facing Germany at the time, leading to the scapegoating of minorities, to mass deportations, to concentration camps that resulted in the deaths of over 8 million people. Where have we all seen this happen before? I wonder. Anyway, he lost miserably at the end of World War II, and rather than face any consequences, he Persona 3'd himself in a bunker, like the coward he was. Now, I'm gonna be entirely honest with y'all, and I'm sure my Jewish ancestors will haunt me for eternity for saying this, but these guys looked pretty damn sharp. You cannot clock the fits. It's literally Hugo Boss. Need I say more? That said, girl, what the hell is going on up in here on this day? What are you doing? He really thought he ate with this look. You can see it in his dead eyes. Oh, and if you think it looks silly with him sitting down, check out how it fits when he stands up. Are you kidding? Now, I think I can see what he was going for here, but boy, was it executed badly. Knowingly giving yourself fat upper penis area? Why are white supremacists always the least supreme whites? Same with this blue look. I can definitely see what he was going for, but homegirl needed a lot more practice with styling clothes. So because he did try and also did fail, I'm going to give him a C along with an extensive apology to my father and his entire family. Oh yeah, when I was looking up Hitler fashion, because that's a totally normal thing to do, and this is a very normal job to have, I came across these collectible dolls that have like little outfits that you can dress him up in, like Barbies for aging Nazis, I guess. And this set includes his dog, and it's $350. and it's out of stock?
What in the shitting hell is going on here?
Alright, glad that's out of the way. Let's move on to Joseph Stalin, General Secretary of the Communist Party, who turned what was supposed to be a collective leadership into a dictatorship, where Miss Thing would be the star of the show. He supported anti-fascist movements while simultaneously implementing a totalitarian regime that resulted in the deaths of millions. If you want the best possible explanation of Stalin and his rise to power, please do yourselves a favor and read a book called Animal Farm by George Orwell, which you should do anyway. Just read more in general. I hate to be that guy, but please, God, please read. Please read and learn to read if you can't.
Do you remember what reading was?
Okay, so first off, can I say something about this picture of young Joseph Stalin without you guys getting mad at me? I won't, because I don't want to be taken out of context one day, but can I just say something? Stalin usually stuck to what became known as the Stalin tunic, which was similar to the Mao suit in that it was a simple and practical garment for government officials and political leaders in the Soviet Union. But it looks like Stalin was actually fashionable enough to have an influence on modern-day designers. Moscow-based label Nuru Brand 24 recently debuted a jacket inspired by the man himself, and it retails for about $1,500 US. Adding insult to injury, they dropped an ad for it that was filmed in the middle of a devastated Ukrainian city, which I'm sure the OG would probably be proud of. Anyway, I wasn't terribly impressed by Stalin's fashion choices, but if he's still inspiring looks to this day, that's gotta be worth something, right? So I'll give him a B. Up next, we've got the third addition to the Sisterhood of Traveling Fascists. It's Francisco Franco, a general who helped overthrow the Second Spanish Republic with the help of Hitler and Mussolini. He then formed a dictatorship over Spain that would last 4 decades. We've got more of the classics: developing a cult of personality, repressing political opponents, forced labor in concentration camps, all under the "I'm gonna fix the economy" handle. All the greatest hits, am I right? The period of economic growth under Franco's regime was referred to as the Spanish Miracle, which could hardly be applied to his taste in fashion. His usual military uniform is fine, but the few times that he does venture outside of that, it doesn't really do him any favors. This one looks like a terrible Hitler cosplay, and this one looks like a terrible cosplay of Mussolini's traditional masculinity look. It's giving, please let me into your friends group. It's no wonder that after Franco finally croaked, Spanish fashion actually really took off, and designers thrived in this new age of individuality. But his looks aren't the worst necessarily, so I'll give him a C. Let's move on to Hideki Tojo, Japanese general and prime minister of Japan during World War II. His leadership was defined by warring with Western rivals and his conquest of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. Countless war crimes ensued as Tojo oversaw state violence and mass killings that were made in the name of Japanese nationalism. After Japan surrendered in 1945, he was tried and hanged at the Tokyo trials. There is a solution. Tojo upheld the strictest of military disciplines, and his wardrobe reflected that. There aren't a whole lot of pictures of this guy, and the ones that do exist, he's pretty much exclusively in his military uniform. I mean, I too won't reveal myself out of drag, but again, this is a fashion video, and more importantly, it's a Coke Francis fashion video. So if the fits are mid, I will say they are mid. It's not that his uniforms look bad or anything, there's just nothing else to go off here. So no shade to Mr. Tojo, but I'm gonna have to give him a D just based off of the lack of variety here. Is that insensitive? Am I allowed to be insensitive to objectively awful dictators? Can someone more socially aware please let me know if I'm being problematic? Up next is Ho Chi Minh, also known as Uncle Ho. No, that is not a joke. That was actually a nickname that he had. He founded the Indochina Communist Party and the Viet Minh and occupied occupied Hanoi when Japan surrendered during World War II. He was still president and party leader during the Vietnam War, and after North Vietnam defeated the greatest military on earth, South Vietnam's capital was renamed to Ho Chi Minh City in his honor. Apparently, the life of this guy is very ambiguous and relatively unknown, like Tommy Wiseau. Minh is another leader who kept his style simple and practical, though his defining accessory was what became known as the Ho Chi Minh sandals. Even though these were made out of recycled tires, they were apparently very durable, definitely inexpensive, and they became a symbol of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. I'll bet there are designer brands selling versions of these bad boys for thousands of dollars right now. As far as the rest of Minh's style goes, though I do like this white suit here, pretty basic overall, but not terrible, so I'll give him a C. Here's another controversial one. This is Josip Tito, Yugoslavian communist revolutionary who served as its president and prime minister. He was the only communist state leader to defy Joseph Stalin, which led to Yugoslavia's expulsion from the Eastern Bloc. Some saw him as a benevolent dictator, but his policies contradicted each other to the point where he basically laid the grounds for the downfall of his efforts, if that makes sense. First off, we gotta address this picture of him from the 1920s. There is a lot going on here. The glasses, the bow tie, the Dick Tracy villain vibes, the Eddie Redmayne jawbones. Can I just say something? Tito and his wife Jovanka were both known for being pretty sharply dressed. Though, unlike some of the other people on this list, I don't think I'll have to grade Tito on a curve, because he definitely holds his own, especially in these Brioni bespoke suits that he became most known for wearing. To this day, some people consider him to be one of the best dressed dictators of all time, and I would have to agree. And I'll say that there's enough variety here for us to give him a high B. Here's a fun one. This is Juan Perón, 29th president of Argentina until his overthrow 10 years later, and the 40th president during the last year of his life. He and his wife Evita pushed for women's suffrage, free higher education, and became champions of the working class, usually employing authoritarian tactics to do so. After Evita's death, a coup deposed Perón and he was exiled, and the political violence in Argentina grew exponentially after this. In short, a lot of mixed opinions on this guy. Basically, Evita was always the real star of the show. There's even a whole ass musical about her. And her looks were always S tier, my God. This blue dress probably goes harder than anything else we'll see today. Dior and Cartier were her designers of choice, and she's definitely taking the grading curve up another notch for this corduroy jacket and trousers combo. No, but really, Perón looks perfectly fine, and I'd say that his collection of suits and military uniforms would usually come out to like a B, but Evita's drip definitely takes it up another rank. So overall, between the two of them, and because I want to shake these rankings up a bit, let's just give these divas an A. Next up, hoo boy! This is Kim Il-sung, founder and supreme leader of North Korea, from the time of its establishment in 1948 to nearly 5 decades later. He authorized the invasion of South Korea in 1950, triggering the Korean War, and following the ceasefire in 1953, North Korea was established as a totalitarian dictatorship, and the rest is history. By the way, in one of my previous videos, in response to one of the jokes I made, some of y'all were actually simping for the government of North Korea in my comments. And hey, by all means, if you want to live in the country that banned leather jackets because this douchebag wore one and wanted to feel special, be my guest. Now look, if I was a member of the Kim dynasty and I was going to dictate that every household had to have a picture of me up on the wall in pristine condition, I'd wear something a little flashier maybe? No? Just me? Anywho, Il-sung's fashion usually changed with the political currents of the time, depending on which leaders he was trying to buddy up with. During the times where he needed to strengthen his ties with China, he stuck to outfits that resembled the Mao suit. Though it's important to note that these are not actually Mao suits, which traditionally have 4 pockets on the front to represent the 4 virtues. We will get to that in a minute. When it came to Russia, he turned to suits, and the suits look pretty dang sharp. He's not quite the style icon that Kim Jong-il would become, but we'll talk about that later. But solid overall, I'll give Kim Il-sung a B. Up next, it's Mao Zedong, founder of the People's Republic of China, and the inspiration for one of my favorite Chinese spots in LA. Seriously, LA people, if you have not had the pineapple fried rice at Mao's Kitchen, you are missing out. After defeating the nationalist government, Zedong established a one-party state. His plans to industrialize China usually backfired, most notably with the Great Leap Forward, which resulted in a famine that caused the deaths of about 40 million people. So, like I briefly mentioned earlier, the Mao suit was originally called the Zhongshan suit, named after Republican leader Sun Zhongshan. But after the PRC was established following the Chinese Civil War, these tunics became known as Mao suits because he just loved wearing them that much. I'm not even kidding. The four virtues that I mentioned earlier represent propriety, justice, honesty, and shame, and the 5 buttons represent the 5 branches of the former Chinese government. Zedong is practically never pictured not wearing one of these bad boys, so is there a whole lot of variety? No, not at all. But the fact that the very name of the suit changed because of him has to be worth something, right? So, I don't know, I'll give him a C, I guess. Here's another interesting case. It's none other than Fidel Castro, Cuban revolutionary and both Prime Minister and President of Cuba for nearly 5 decades. After overthrowing fascist dictator Fulgencio Batista during the Cuban Revolution, he turned Cuba into a one-party socialist state. While he expanded positive socialist programs like healthcare and education, he also ruthlessly suppressed his political opponents. There are very mixed opinions on Castro, and overall he was a very complicated dude. Even though Castro went to such lengths to champion the working class, homie sure loved his Rolexes and his Adidas tracksuits, especially later in life. Adidas tracksuits are weird because they're like super corny, but also when you see someone wearing one in real life, you're like, oh man, oh, Lord, he coming. It is funny that this military uniform that became synonymous with communist revolutionaries was replaced by such symbolically capitalist brands like Adidas and Rolex. That said, Castro visually rocked both ideologies. In 1984, Castro was named one of the world's best dressed people in People magazine, and I gotta agree. Anyway, I'll give our boy Castro a solid A. Next up, we've got Ferdinand Marcos Sr., 10th president of the Philippines who ruled the country under martial law and described his own political philosophy as, quote, constitutional authoritarianism. He allegedly lied about his accomplishments during World War II, plunged the Philippines into extreme poverty, and aggressively repressed his political opponents, especially towards Muslims and suspected communists. It's estimated that Marcos stole about $10 billion from the Central Bank of the Philippines, and he and his wife Imelda held the Guinness World Record for the largest ever theft by a government.
Reagan, who was president at this time, actually offered Marcos asylum in the US. And so when Marcos did ultimately decide to step down in February of 1986, Reagan sent 2 planes to cart Marcos and 90 members of his entourage, along with millions of dollars worth of loot.
So you'd think with $10 billion in stolen funds, Marcos would have, I don't know, worn more than exactly one shirt? Seriously! Almost identical shirts in every single one of these pictures. The only slight variation is the patterning. I think Imelda made better use of that $10 billion because the drip is simply peak. This red dress is one of my favorite things we have seen thus far in this video. And let's not forget her shoe collection, which was so iconic that Manila Luzon referenced it in her Snatch Game impersonation of her. Normally, Marcos would have only gotten a D with that one goddamn shirt, but Imelda's affecting the curve so much that I'm now questioning if it was a fair thing to do in the first place. But together, I think they average out to a B. We are about to be treated to an absolute feast for the eyes. with none other than Muammar Gaddafi, who ruled Libya for 4 decades until his assassination when I was in high school. After coming to power through a military coup, he deported Libya's Italian population along with other Western military bases, and promoted Sharia and Islamic socialism. After the 2011 Arab Spring descended into a civil war, his government was overthrown, and the overwhelming majority of Libyans have condemned him for systematically violating human rights. Well, say what you want about Gaddafi, but my god, did this man have style. He allegedly would change his outfits multiple times per day, and he knew he was a style icon, and that whatever he wore would eventually become a fad. He usually sported extravagant versions of traditional Libyan dress, since he wasn't exactly a fan of Western influences, aside from the obvious aviator Snoopy influence in this one, of course. The moment former President Obama saw this embroidered kufi, he immediately realized he had been underdressed for every event in his entire career, and he knew he had to get the hell out of there ASAP. You can see it in his eyes. Dictatorship? More like dictatorDRIP, am I right? This is honestly such an impressive collection, and you know what? I think it's time that we finally awarded our very first S rank of the day. Absolutely fabulous. It's gonna be pretty hard to top Gaddafi. Let's move on to Idi Amin, third president of Uganda, whose regime was specifically characterized by its sheer brutality. After learning he would be arrested for misappropriating army funds during his time as a deputy commander, he launched the 1971 Ugandan coup d'etat, declaring himself president and implementing an extreme form of nationalism. Very Trumpy in that regard. He even earned the nickname Butcher of Uganda, and an estimated 300,000 people were either tortured or killed during his presidency. Considering Amin was homies with Gaddafi, you'd think some of that influence might rub off on the people he was close with. Maybe for some, seemingly not with Amin. Like Tojo, there are hardly any pictures of this guy without his military uniform. And thanks to the Twitter menswear guy, I am able to identify that this is not a well-fitted suit. Shoulders are too small, lines buckling where they shouldn't be, arms are too short, wrinkles everywhere. Come on, man. What are we doing? Be better. I don't have much else to say about this guy, so I'm gonna put him in the D pile. Moving on, this is Augusto Pinochet, Chilean military officer and dictator of Chile, following a military coup with the support of the United States. This ended the left-wing government and civilian rule in this country, and Pinochet persecuted and executed thousands of socialists and leftists. Pinochet's neoliberal economics heavily influenced Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher, and was later prosecuted for embezzlement, tax fraud, and faced about 300 criminal charges for various human rights violations. Pinochet looked at Hitler's outfits and was like, hey, can I copy your homework? And then Hitler was like, yeah, just make it different enough so that it doesn't look too obvious. Which is why I'm surprised Trump just won't ditch the toupee and start wearing cool hats. Or maybe he wanted to and his advisors told him that it would be a really bad look. If we could at least make our fascist takeover look as sharp as Pinochet's uniforms, I don't know. They look fine, but they're really just more of the same. I'm personally not super impressed at this point, so I'm gonna give him a C. Next up, it's gonna take every ounce of willpower within me to not make gratuitous Dead Kennedys references with this one. This is Pol Pot, leader of Cambodia's communist movement, who turned Cambodia into what he called the Democratic Kampuchea. He perpetuated the Cambodian genocide, which resulted in the deaths of about a quarter of the country's population. He sought to abolish all money, religion, and private property, but the US somehow still supported his government as a way to combat Soviet influence in Southeast Asia. Under Pot's reign, Cambodia's Communist Party, known as the Khmer Rouge, forced all of its citizens to wear the same black clothing. The entire Khmer Rouge look also included a red scarf known as a crown trauma, and the shoes made from tires that we mentioned earlier. Well, at the very least, Pot practiced what he preached and wore what was dictated. Looks like he branched out a little bit more later in life once he was placed on house arrest for crimes against humanity, but there really isn't any other variety here other than this uniform that's synonymous with one of the most brutal regimes in history. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about this one either, so I'm gonna give this a D. We're coming up on our last few dictators here. You know him, you know him, it's Saddam Hussein, 5th president of Iraq, author of erotic fiction, and former husband to Satan. After taking office, he initiated the Iran-Iraq War, ordered a genocide against Kurdish rebels, and brutally suppressed the 1991 Iraqi uprisings of those wishing to seek independence from his government. Now, when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, Hussein was accused of having weapons of mass destruction, which later turned out to be false. But he was ultimately convicted over his prior crimes against humanity and was subsequently executed when I was in middle school. This picture is so cheeky, I love it. Hussein was actually known for always looking pretty dapper, and he even had his own tailor, who ironically was Kurdish, the very group of people he focused on oppressing the most, and said tailor also made clothes for said Kurdish rebels, but he allegedly didn't like mixing politics with business, so he was one of those, I guess. Like Kim Il-sung, Hussein's fashion varied depending on which aspects of Iraqi society he was trying to appeal to. He still liked wearing Kurdish fashion himself. He liked certain aspects of Western fashion despite his anti-Western sentiments. He sported a traditional kaftan, and sometimes he went super extra with looks like this blue velvet robe here. Oh my god, work, bitch. Look at that little teacup there. Utter hypocrisy aside, very good fashion collection here, so we'll give him a solid A. Also, somewhat related, I came across a Twitter page the other day called Saddam Hussein's Hiding Spots, and it's entirely dedicated to anything that even remotely resembles Saddam Hussein's hiding spot, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, and so now you all know about it too. Moving on. Up next is Alexander Lukashenko, first and only president of Belarus, currently the longest-serving leader in Europe, and has been labeled Europe's last dictator by the media. After his election, he took the government in a very Trumpy direction, like dismissing the Supreme Council, suppressing opponents and media freedom, and rigging votes during his election in 2020. His re-election was so sus that the US, UK, and EU have all refused to recognize him as the legitimate president of Belarus. As you can see, not only does Lukashenko stick almost entirely to military uniforms and suits, he also permanently exists in a mom said it's my turn on the Xbox posture. You look at this picture right now and tell me this isn't your sleep paralysis demon. He recently called for young Belarusians to stop wearing Western fashion because it's a threat to national security. This guy really is just Trump if he had no riz. Quote,
"All our youth want to dress so fancy. Even I, the president, don't dress up like some ordinary young people. I talk about these imported brands and stuff. I never heard of such thing. And even if I have, they pay a lot of money for those brands. Well, our people already saw things nicely. Why do you need this fancy rag? And here today, if a young person doesn't dress up, I don't even know how. Do we want to become Ukraine? Believe me, it's easy. There's one more candle stamper will be there."
What? Well, hopefully he'll change his mind, because whatever he's got going on right now isn't doing him any favors. So, into the D pile he goes. We are finally onto our last dictator of the 20th century. It's none other than Kim Jong-il, second supreme leader of North Korea. He continued to rule the country as a repressive totalitarian dictatorship, and the economic crisis he inherited when assuming the position never really went away. This resulted in a famine, and he decided to rectify the situation by strengthening the military. Yeah, that'll that'll do it. Anyway, after his death in 2011, he was declared Eternal General Secretary, in keeping with the Kim dynasty's tradition of giving posthumous titles to its deceased members. A men's fashion site declared Kim Jong-il to be the second worst dictator in history, but I would have to hard disagree with that. But the same site also said Gaddafi was the worst dressed, so that tells you everything you need to know about these knuckleheads. Jong-il was usually seen wearing a version of what's called a safari suit, but you see, it's how you style these things that truly matters. Is this suit particularly flattering? No. But paired with these oversized Yeezy shades and the 3-inch heels to make him look taller, work. He was also a big fan of these anorak jackets, sometimes pairing them with great hats and, as always, the sunglasses. But my favorite look of his absolutely has to be this sparkly silver jacket and these leather fingerless gloves. And I'm happy to say that we'll be closing out this list with a solid A. So, there's that. Ivy Alley 3688 says, imagine going to a movie about the creation of the atom bomb and being most troubled by anything other than the atom bomb. JM221 says, something about a grizzled 1800s prospector going to a movie theater and then running home to write a bad review is effing hilarious. That was exactly what I said when Mitchell sent me his voiceover. Puffhead the Great 8527 says, had too much sauce. The government had to deploy the earthquake machine. And finally, Skaterboy 728 says, I really do think that Cars 2 would have been better without the gratuitous wheel job scene. You too could be featured in the next video. Leave a comment below. I will pick my favorite ones and give you a shout out next time. But if you would like to guarantee your name be featured at the end of every video, please consider joining my Patreon. If you join any of the membership tiers that are conveniently named after Fallout protagonists, your name will be featured at the end of every video. You might also get other cool stuff like access to my Discord, behind the scenes content on how I make my wigs, ad-free, and uncensored versions of my videos. So if you love my content and my drag, you can support this channel directly by clicking the link to my Patreon in the description box. If you would like to see me simp for my favorite game characters and get visibly frustrated in real time, please follow me on Twitch. And if you want to see even more of my clown mug elsewhere, please consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. I really don't post on TikTok a lot nowadays, but you know, whatever. My handle for all of the above is @QueenCokeFrancis. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't done so already, please hold a state-sanctioned fashion show and automatically declare yourself the winner. But when the people don't recognize real fashion when they see it and plot a mass uprising against you, secure your position by going ahead and unzipping your pants and dick-slapping those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. Thank you again to all my patrons and subscribers who have helped my channel grow and thrive the way that it has been. I am so close to 100,000 subs. If you could help me reach that goal, that would be very much appreciated because boy, I love trophies and I love the color silver. And of course, as always, until next time,